There is a moment almost everyone experiences, but rarely understands. You stop checking your phone. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering whether you said too much or not enough. And in that quiet space, something unsettling appears. Relief. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped chasing. Most people mistake chasing for love. They confuse emotional urgency with connection. They believe that if they pull harder, explain more, give more, sacrifice more, something will finally lock into place. The Stoics saw this pattern long before modern psychology gave it a name. They understood that attachment, when rooted in fear, does not create closeness. It creates pressure, and pressure suffocates what it tries to preserve. Epictetus taught that the root of emotional suffering is the desire for things to be other than they are. Nowhere is this more visible than in relationships. We want someone to miss us, to think about us, to feel our absence. But beneath that desire often lies something more fragile, the need to feel chosen, validated, confirmed. Stoicism does not shame this need, it exposes it, because when your sense of worth depends on someone else's attention, you no longer stand on solid ground. You become reactive. You overinterpret silence. You personalize distance. You abandon dignity to avoid loss. Marcus Aurelius warned against this quiet surrender. He reminded himself that nothing external, no person, no opinion, no affection, has the authority to define your inner state unless you grant it that power. This is where Stoic philosophy begins to feel uncomfortable, because it refuses to soothe insecurity. Instead, it strengthens the self. The modern conversation around relationships often revolves around tactics, what to say, when to pull back, how to trigger desire. The Stoics would have rejected this approach entirely. Not because attraction does not matter, but because manipulation corrupts character. And character, to the Stoics, was everything. They believed that the most compelling presence a person can have is inner coherence. When who you are does not fracture under pressure. When your behavior does not contradict your values. When your emotional state does not collapse in response to another person's uncertainty. This is what truly makes absence felt, not strategy, stability. Seneca wrote that the person who depends on another for emotional peace lives as a hostage, not to love, but to fear. Fear of loss, fear of replacement, fear of being forgotten. The Stoic does not eliminate attachment. He disciplines it. He refuses to attach his self-worth to outcomes he cannot control. You cannot control whether someone misses you. You cannot command longing. You cannot force emotional gravity. But you can control something far more powerful: the way you inhabit your own life. People do not miss what begs. They miss what stands. When you stop orienting your behavior around someone else's reactions, your presence changes. Your voice steadies. Your attention returns inward. Your actions become grounded rather than performative. This shift is subtle but unmistakable, and others feel it, not consciously, instinctively. Stoicism teaches that human beings are deeply sensitive to inner posture. We sense desperation. We sense neediness. We sense when someone's happiness depends on us, and that dependence is heavy. But we also sense composure, self-respect, emotional independence, and that independence creates space. Space allows desire to breathe. This is the Stoic paradox. The less you try to be missed, the more memorable you become, because you are no longer chasing validation. You are living. Epictetus insisted that freedom begins when you stop trying to control what belongs to others, their opinions, their feelings, their attention. The moment you release that effort, something returns to you: energy, clarity, self-command. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional sovereignty. You still care, but you no longer collapse. You still connect, but you no longer cling. This distinction changes everything. Most people believe that being missed is about absence, but absence alone does nothing. People forget absence all the time. What they do not forget is contrast. The contrast between calm presence and its disappearance. The contrast between someone who added stability to their emotional world and the silence that follows. That stability cannot be faked. It is built through self-respect, through a life that does not orbit another person, through values that remain intact even when affection fluctuates. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person should be so rooted in himself that praise and blame move him no more than the wind. Imagine bringing that posture into a relationship. Not coldness, not indifference, but groundedness. You show up fully. You speak honestly. You act with integrity. And if someone pulls away, you do not chase them into smaller and smaller versions of yourself. You remain. This is not a power move. It is dignity, and dignity is unforgettable. In American culture, independence has always carried a unique weight. The ability to stand alone, to self-regulate, to move forward without begging for approval. Stoicism refines this cultural instinct. It teaches that true independence is emotional before it is external. When you no longer need to be missed to feel whole, you paradoxically become someone others feel the absence of, because you brought something rare, not entertainment, not validation, but calm. In the next part, we will go deeper into emotional independence, how Stoic resilience transforms relationships, why people are drawn to those who do not need them, and how mastering your inner world
quietly reshapes how others experience you. There is a silence that weakens connection, and there is a silence that intensifies it. Most people do not know the difference. They go silent in anger,
in resentment, in the hope of punishment. This silence is loud with need, and it repels. The Stoics understood another kind of silence, silence that is not withdrawal, but containment, not avoidance, but self-command. When Epictetus spoke of freedom, he did not describe distance from others. He described distance from inner compulsion, compulsion to explain, to justify, to seek reassurance. The moment you feel the urge to convince someone of your worth, Stoicism intervenes. It asks a severe question. Why must this be proven? The need to be missed often arises from a deeper discomfort, the fear of being replaceable, of being ordinary, of not having mattered. The Stoics did not deny this fear. They dismantled its authority. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that every human being is transient, every affection temporary, every relationship subject to change. This awareness was not meant to harden the heart. It was meant to steady it. Because when you expect permanence from what is impermanent, you suffer twice, once in hope, once in loss. Stoic emotional independence begins with this realism. You enjoy connection fully, but you do not demand guarantees. This changes how you show up. You stop negotiating your value. You stop overgiving to secure affection. You stop monitoring every signal for reassurance. This restraint creates gravity. People are drawn to those who do not leak emotional urgency. Urgency communicates fear. Fear communicates need. Need invites either pity or control. Neither creates longing. Seneca wrote that the person who is desperate for love is incapable of receiving it well, because desperation is inwardly loud. It fills the space where connection should form. The Stoic learns to tolerate that space, the space of uncertainty, of not knowing, of not being chosen in the moment. This tolerance is not indifference. It is maturity. Maturity allows affection to arise freely, not under pressure. When you step back without resentment, something subtle happens. You stop feeding the emotional dynamic. You stop reacting. And in the absence of reaction, others are forced to feel. They feel the absence of emotional labor you once provided, the calm presence that stabilized them, the attention that was not demanding, the steadiness they took for granted. People do not miss drama. They miss regulation. They miss how they felt in your presence. Stoicism teaches that you cannot control what others feel, but you can control what you bring. And what you bring repeatedly becomes associated with you. Calm, respect, emotional safety. These are rare experiences. When removed, they are noticed. This is why chasing destroys longing.
It keeps the emotional environment noisy. Noise prevents reflection. Silence invites it. But only when that silence is clean. Clean silence has no accusation in it, no manipulation, no hidden demand. It is simply the absence of unnecessary movement. Epictetus taught that dignity is maintained by refusing to beg emotionally, not because begging is shameful, but because it transfers power. When your peace depends on another's response, you have surrendered authority. Stoicism is the practice of reclaiming it. This reclamation often feels uncomfortable at first. The nervous system is accustomed to engagement, to monitoring, to reacting. When you stop doing these things, anxiety may rise. The Stoics expected this. They warned that the mind protests discipline before it adapts to it. Stay. Do not rush to relieve discomfort by reaching out. This is not punishment. It is training. Training yourself to sit with uncertainty without collapsing. Each time you succeed, something changes. You begin to trust yourself. Trust reduces urgency. Urgency fades. Your presence becomes quieter. And quieter presence is felt more deeply. This is not a tactic. It is a transformation. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused harm.
In relationships, this means refusing to mirror instability. If someone withdraws, you do not chase. If someone tests, you do not perform. If someone distances, you remain whole. Wholeness is disarming. It removes leverage. And without leverage, emotional games collapse. What remains is authenticity. Either connection reforms or it ends honestly. Both outcomes are acceptable to the Stoic because his worth was never at stake. Stoicism also reframes longing itself. Longing is not something you induce. It is something that emerges in reflection. People miss you not while you are explaining yourself. They miss you when they are alone with the memory of how you made them feel. This requires time and space. Space that only exists when you are no longer filling it with effort. Most people fear giving space. They believe space equals loss. The Stoic understands something more precise. Space reveals truth. Either there was genuine connection or there was dependency. Stoicism prefers truth over comfort because truth allows dignity. Dignity allows peace, and peace allows attraction to form naturally. This is why Stoic detachment is so often misunderstood. It is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional clarity. You do not withdraw affection. You withdraw anxiety. You do not remove care. You remove fear. What remains is clean presence. That presence lingers. In the next part, we will confront the most difficult test of this philosophy, when silence
is misunderstood, when distance is painful, when the ego demands recognition, and why remaining calm and self-respecting under those conditions changes everything. There is a moment that defines emotional maturity more than almost any other. It happens after the conversation ends, after the distance appears, after silence replaces certainty. It is the moment when the impulse rises, the impulse to reach out, to clarify, to remind someone that you exist. This impulse feels urgent. It disguises itself as honesty, as courage,
as just wanting closure. But the Stoics recognized it for what it truly is, a demand for relief. Relief from uncertainty, relief from vulnerability, relief from the discomfort of not knowing where you stand. Epictetus taught that the greatest test of self-mastery is not restraint in action, but restraint in reaction. Anyone can act when invited. Few can remain composed when uninvited. This is where most people lose dignity without realizing it. They do not collapse loudly. They erode quietly. One message too many, one explanation too detailed, one attempt to control perception. Each small act seems harmless. Together, they shift the balance of power. Not power over the other person, power over oneself. The Stoics were uncompromising on this point. The moment your peace depends on another person's response, you are no longer free. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that external silence is not an insult. It is information. Information about where things stand. Information you may not like, but information nonetheless. The untrained mind treats silence as rejection. The Stoic treats it as reality, and reality does not require commentary. This is where Stoic restraint becomes visible. You feel the urge, and you do not obey it, not out of pride, out of self-respect. Self-respect is not coldness. It is loyalty to your own nervous system. Every time you override that urge, something subtle happens. You prove to yourself that you can survive uncertainty. This proof builds confidence, not social confidence, existential confidence. The confidence that you will remain intact even if someone walks away. This is the confidence people feel later, often too late, because it cannot be simulated. It can only be lived. Seneca warned that emotional dependency turns love into negotiation. You give affection expecting security. You give effort expecting reassurance. When reassurance does not come, resentment begins. The Stoic breaks this cycle at the root. He gives without bargaining. And when giving is no longer appropriate, he stops without accusation. This discipline is not cruelty, it is clarity. Clarity prevents humiliation. Humiliation does not come from rejection. It comes from abandoning yourself to avoid it. Most people do not regret being left. They regret how they behaved when they sensed it coming. The messages they wished they had not sent, the dignity they traded for momentary relief. Stoicism exists to prevent this regret, not by numbing emotion, by structuring it. You allow the feeling, you do not outsource it.
You do not require someone else to regulate your discomfort. You sit with it. This sitting is active. It is training. Just as muscles adapt to resistance, the nervous system adapts to restraint. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once felt urgent becomes optional. This is emotional strength. And emotional strength is attractive precisely because it does not ask to be. There is a common belief that if you do not fight for connection, it will disappear. The Stoics understood the opposite. If connection requires you to abandon your center, it was never stable. Stable connection does not require constant maintenance. It breathes. It expands and contracts naturally. When contraction happens, the Stoic does not panic. He does not chase expansion. He remains. Remaining is the hardest action. It feels like doing nothing, but it is doing everything. You are maintaining coherence. You are refusing to fragment. You are protecting the version of yourself you will have to live with later. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best thing you can leave behind is a well-ordered soul. Not an impression, not an explanation. Order. Order shows itself most clearly in moments of loss, when attention is no longer given, when affection is no longer guaranteed, when your value is no longer mirrored back to you. At that moment, most people scramble. They try to restore equilibrium externally.
The Stoic restores it internally. He reminds himself of what was never negotiable, his conduct, his restraint, his dignity. This internal restoration has consequences, not immediate ones, but lasting ones. When someone leaves a calm presence, the nervous system remembers it, not intellectually, physiologically. They remember how safe they felt, how steady, how unpressured. And when that presence is no longer available, the contrast becomes sharp. This is how absence acquires weight, not through manipulation, through memory. You cannot force someone to miss you, but you can give them something worth missing. And that something is not attention, it is emotional regulation. Most people have never experienced being with someone who does not need them. This experience is rare, and rarity creates value. The Stoics would never advise you to withdraw in order to provoke longing. They would advise you to withdraw to preserve integrity. Longing, if it appears, is a side effect, not the goal. This distinction matters because when your goal is integrity, you win regardless of outcome. Either connection reforms on honest terms, or it ends without self-betrayal. Both are victories. Ego resists this truth. Ego wants recognition. Ego wants confirmation. Ego wants to be chosen. The Stoics understood ego as a poor guide. It demands what cannot be secured. Stoic discipline demands only what can be governed: your actions, your words, your restraint. This governance becomes most visible in what you do not do, the messages you do not send, the explanations you do not offer, the performances you refuse to give. These absences speak loudly, not to manipulate, but to signal self-possession. In the final part, we will integrate everything: how Stoic emotional discipline transforms not only how others experience you, but how you experience yourself. And we will conclude with a quiet, intelligent invitation to reflection, connection, and thoughtful engagement. At a certain point, the question changes. It is no longer, how do I make them miss me? It becomes, how do I live in a way that I never abandon myself again? This is where Stoicism completes its work. Because the Stoics were never interested in controlling others, they were interested in restoring inner authority. Inner authority is the ability to remain aligned with your values regardless of outcome. It is calm under approval. It is steady under rejection. It is coherent under uncertainty. When you develop this authority, something profound happens. You stop needing distance to create value. You carry value with you wherever you go. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person should be like a rocky promontory against which the waves continually break, yet it stands firm. This firmness is not rigidity. It is rootedness. Rootedness in self-respect. Rootedness in emotional self-governance. Rootedness in knowing that your worth does not fluctuate with attention. When you live this way, relationships transform. You stop chasing connection. You allow connection. You stop auditioning for affection. You offer presence. And if that presence is not received, you do not collapse. You do not harden. You simply continue forward. This continuation is what most people never do. They pause their lives waiting to be chosen, waiting to be missed, waiting to be validated. The Stoic refuses this pause. Life is happening now. Your character is being shaped now. Your habits are becoming permanent now. To suspend yourself emotionally for someone else's uncertainty is to waste your own life. Seneca warned that we suffer not because we love, but because we attach our peace to outcomes we cannot guarantee. Love without inner sovereignty becomes anxiety. Love with inner sovereignty becomes strength. Strength is what others remember, not words, not explanations, but the way you remained composed when things were unclear. This composure creates psychological gravity, not attraction through strategy, attraction through stability. People are drawn back to what felt grounded, safe, real. And even if they do not return, something more important remains. You, intact, unashamed, unregretful. Most people look back on relationships and feel embarrassment, not about loving, but about losing themselves. The Stoics designed their philosophy to prevent exactly this, not by teaching avoidance, but by teaching self-loyalty. Self-loyalty is the refusal to betray your values to relieve discomfort. It is the willingness to feel uncertainty without outsourcing it. It is the courage to be misunderstood temporarily rather than self-erased permanently. This loyalty changes how you grieve connection. You grieve honestly, but without humiliation. You feel sadness, but without self-contempt. You accept loss,
but without resentment. This emotional cleanliness is rare, and it has consequences. When you move on with dignity, others feel it, not as punishment, as contrast. They feel the absence of emotional chaos. They feel the silence where reassurance used to be. They feel the space where you once stabilized them. And in that space, reflection happens. Sometimes longing follows. Sometimes it does not. The Stoic accepts both, because the outcome was never the point. The point was coherence. When your inner life is coherent, peace follows. When peace follows, desperation disappears. And when desperation disappears, you become unmistakable. Not louder, quieter, more grounded, more real. This is the kind of presence that cannot be faked. It can only be lived. Day after day, choice after choice. Stoicism does not promise that everyone will miss you. It promises something more reliable, that you will respect yourself, that you will not beg for affection, that you will not trade dignity for temporary relief, that you will walk away whole. And paradoxically, this is what makes you unforgettable.
Because most people remember not who tried hardest to stay, but who left without bitterness, who remained kind without chasing, who stood steady without demanding. If you have followed this reflection to the end, it suggests you are not interested in manipulation. You are interested in mastery, mastery of emotion, mastery of reaction, mastery of self. If this way of thinking resonates, staying connected supports its continuation, not as obligation, as alignment. A thoughtful subscription helps this work reach others who are ready for depth rather than tactics. If you know someone who values self-respect over games and clarity over noise, consider sharing this with them, not to convince, to reflect together. And if you leave a comment, let it be intentional, a thought you've tested internally, a question worth exploring, a response that respects the time and care behind this work. That kind of engagement matters. Calm is not withdrawal. Detachment is not indifference. Stoic love is not absence. It is presence without fear. And that is what remains long after words are gone.